Good afternoon and welcome to the Demolition Daily Livestream. I'm your host, Mark Anthony, or at least I am for now, as the Demolition Daily Livestream officially comes to an end at the end of this week. Don't worry, the format itself isn't going away. It's proved far too popular for that. And besides, there's still a lot of people that I'd like to speak to, a lot of subjects that I'd like to cover. So all we're doing is just downshift the frequency of the show, possibly to once or twice a week rather than daily. But keep an eye out for notifications on that, and also on a series of new Facebook watch parties we have planned for the coming weeks as well. Now, before I get into the main part of today's show, I just wanted to draw your attention to this rather smart new T-shirt that I'm wearing, which arrived on my desk this morning, all the way from Italy. Hang on a second. I hope you can see that nice and clearly. As you can see, the shirt is from attachment, refurbishment and rebuild specialist Rapallo, the company behind the self-assembly concrete cracker that we featured on Demolition News a few months ago. So thank you to Rapallo for sending the T-shirt, or should I say, grazie mille, which is all the Italian that I know. You just became today's show sponsor. I urge everyone to check out Rapallo at their website, and if you need the details, hopefully, technology allowing, that should be on the screen now. Please go and check them out. Now, this weekend saw the simultaneous demolition of 8 chimneys at the Hazelwood power station, once described by the World Wildlife Fund as Australia's dirtiest power station. According to some reports, the plant was responsible for around 5% of Australia's CO2 emissions. Now, if you've seen the demolitionnews.com video of the blast, you'll know that it was an impressive engineering feat to bring down 8 chimneys, each measuring 137 metres tall. But I think what makes that even more remarkable is that the blast was engineered and managed, at least in part, from the UK. And that due to the current COVID-19 travel restrictions, the company behind the blast was about 10,000 miles away when the implosion happened. To find out more about this unusual turn of events, I'm delighted to be joined today by Roland Alford of Alford Technologies. Good afternoon, Roland.
Good afternoon, Mark.
I guess the first question is, how does a British company end up blowing up chimneys in Australia?
Well, it was really a series of coincidences. We obviously did the demolition job in Didcot, finishing that off, and that was a very sad one, but it gained us a reputation for being able to do things remotely. We then won another job in Australia where they required everyone to do it again remotely, so we did that successfully, and off the back of that we built a reputation in Australia, and we were approached by Delta, our partners, and so we bid together. They were the prime and we were the explosive specialists, so it really came about through that sequence of events.
Now, you mentioned the word remotely. Certainly Didcot remotely was a few hundred meters away, so you were using remotely controlled machines. You were slightly more remote this time.
Yes, absolutely.
I take it you weren't actually controlling things from here. It was done there, but you were managing it from here.
Correct, yes. So we had a sort of command and control process put in place. So I was supposed to have been in Australia at the moment, and obviously with the COVID thing, we weren't able to get out there. So they tried very hard. We were lobbying the local government over there to allow us dispensation to have people actually in Australia. And it was clear that that just wasn't going to happen. And even if we had been able to, we could have been stuck there for 6 months. So that was a non-starter. So eventually we came up with the alternative plan, which was we had one person already on site, a local guy, but we'd been working with him for years. So we had to recruit another demolition team, interview people, get them based on their experience and knowledge, pull them in, educate them about what we were doing, and then actually deploy them. Meanwhile, all the demolition design work was being done in the UK. So we were doing all that remotely using teleconferencing, so all the tools that everyone is now used to, WhatsApp and Teams. And we spent months working on this. We'd been working for months before the COVID thing started, so we were already used to sort of communicating at odd hours of the day. But obviously, it was a bit different when we got closer to the actual demolition.
So, how long was this project actually in planning?
Well, I first went to see it when we were still doing the other job, so that was probably August 2017. We won the contract a few months later. With the chimneys, we've been working pretty intensively for about 8 months. We're also currently obviously working on other parts of the project, but that part for the chimneys specifically for about 8 months.
And you mentioned the fact that you were communicating by Teams and WhatsApp. I'm not going to make a sweeping generalisation, but to the best of my knowledge, that's the first time anyone's ever managed an implosion over technology like that. It's remarkable.
I mean, on the day when on Sunday night, so it came down to about 3 a.m. UK time. We were in my conference room. We had a big screen with one video stream. We had 2 other big TVs on there, each with a different stream. So we were hoping to get live footage from our drone. We couldn't stream that. Unfortunately, Google are blocking that kind of live streaming. But we were able to tune into one of the live TV stations in Australia, and they had a camera up from a helicopter. And then somebody else who was just living in the town about 3 kilometers away, they had a camera set up on their roof, the really long lens, and they were just streaming that as well. So we had 2 YouTube channels, and then we have one internal one where we had guys at the control point on site holding up a camera, and we had that. And then we also had a WhatsApp call going live so that we could speak to the guys at the firing point, and we have one Teams call going. So we were talking with people at different sites. It was pretty exciting, quite impressive, and took a while to sort of set it up. And throughout the evening, we were picking and choosing different streams to make sure that we had the best live footage as it was going.
Now, you mentioned the fact that you, oh, excuse me, 1 second. Sorry.
Right.
You mentioned the fact that you took on some people in Australia itself. How did you go about actually sort of training these guys up to be able to carry out such a complex engineering task?
Well, 2 of the 3 people that we had to recruit from outside, as it were, had done chimneys in the past, but our design was somewhat innovative. So we had changed the way that we were actually cutting out a bird mouth. The proportions of it and where the pivot point were different from what they'd done before. And also the way that we connected the charges, because my experience, I spent a long time thinking about what was the neatest, most efficient way of connecting charges rather than just the normal way. And we came up with something that I think was a lot tidier, a lot more intuitive and simpler to connect. So very fast to actually charge each of the chimneys. So that was mostly just with instructions, but the guys brought with them their own knowledge and experience, and it was really good because we had a sort of a communication method so that they felt that they could look at our plans and then say, well, how about doing this? How about doing that? And up to a point we were able to do that. And then a couple of days before we had to absolutely lock down every little detail, but they were not only brought in just to follow our instructions, but also to help us develop them.
I know, having spoken to explosive engineers in the past, one of the key parts of their job obviously is at the last minute to do that one final check, go and make sure everything's in place and everything else. How did you do that? Obviously it was a local person that did it, but how was that relayed back?
Right. Well, we had a checklist and several ITPs, and so different people had to check various things. So for myself, I had to sign a letter. So I prepared a letter, and we were being informed via mostly WhatsApp that certain checks had been done. We were signing those off as we were going, and then finally, when we'd reached the last one at 15 minutes, I then signed it and we posted it. So we did that, and that was then the last 15 minutes, and then we had further checks and things. So mostly it was a matter of us keeping quiet and waiting for them to sort of reach a certain point and then relay that back to us, and everyone was sort of monitoring that. And there were delays in the end, and ironically, given the fact that most people are worried about wind being too strong, we had probably a 40-minute delay because the winds weren't strong enough. And that's certainly a first for me. But they were worried about dust clouds, and there was a risk of asbestos in the air. And so they had a minimum wind because they wanted the wind to actually blow the cloud away from the site. And if it was not strong enough, the risk was that it was just going to linger there and hang there, which is what they didn't want. So it took me a while to sort of actually identify what the delay was, because somebody said, well, it's to do with the winds. They're going in the perfect direction. They're too weak. And it took me a moment to sort of understand what they just said and clarify it and get to the bottom of it. And then they were doing checks every 40 minutes, I think, or every 20 minutes they were doing another wind check. And then finally they got the right window and said, okay, we're going.
Now, you've mentioned the fact that you did this in a unique way, a unique way to yourselves in the way that the charges were set and making it more neat. Without giving away any trade secrets, can you take me through exactly what well, not exactly, but giving us an indication of what you actually did there?
Well, yes. Typically, people always work with a rule of thumb that you take out 2/3 of the circumference of a chimney, and you create a bird mouth, and it will then collapse in that direction. The risk is that you've taken out so much that the remaining bit of concrete can't take the entire mass of the chimney above, and so it crumbles, and at that stage you lose control. So what we did was we moved our pivot points further forward. So we actually removed a significantly smaller amount of the front of the chimney, released it at the back with just a cut, and that way we had more control over it and a guarantee that it wasn't going to crumble too early. Now they'll always drop, but it's just a matter of controlling the timing of that, because you really want it to start tilting before it goes vertically, and that way it's already committed to going in the right direction. There is a risk that if it drops too early, it could topple and could go backwards. And
in terms of the explosives you used, how much explosive was it, and the types of charges and that kind of thing?
Well, we had approximately 200 charges per chimney, so we had 35 kilos, something like that, per chimney. So not a huge number. It depends on, different people have different styles. We preferred a simpler system, so we didn't want too many charges. Went slightly bigger, but we calculated it. One of the unique things that Alfords have is a test site in the UK. So because it was going to be too difficult, and effectively the chimneys were in pretty shocking state, so we couldn't do any test shots or test blasts on any of the chimneys because there was just too much risk of collapsing bits of them. So what we had to do was to make some targets in the UK. So we cast them the right sort of concrete, the right steel, had to wait for the concrete to go off, and then we charged those, and we did different test shots. So we were able to demonstrate that we had the appropriate load, but with the inconvenience of not being able to actually do it in Australia with exactly the same explosive. But we were able to get it pretty accurate, and it gave us a lot of indication of how it was going to work.
Now, I first came across your company, as you mentioned previously, the tragedy at the Didcot Power Station, and the fact that you were given the job of taking down what remained of the partially collapsed boiler house. And one of the drivers there was the fact that you were using technology to take explosive charges using remotely controlled machines and actually place them and conduct it from there. Now, that wasn't the case here at the Hazelwood Power Station, but here we are just a few years later, and you're active here and in Australia in the demolition business. How the hell did that come to be? Because it was a big departure for you guys at the beginning, wasn't it?
Absolutely. So we hadn't done any demolitions for many years. My father, back in the 80s, was quite active, and then moved away from it completely. So it was a big learning curve. We didn't know anything about how to operate on a construction or demolition site or anything at all. But we got a real taste for it, and we realized also that there was a lot that we could bring to the industry in terms of experience and knowledge and technology that I think that the industry is ready for. Absolutely needs to have this sort of infusion, especially when you're cutting steel and the way of cutting everything and simply using explosives to kick out a column, to me just doesn't make sense, and it's absolutely possible to cut it and kick it explosively and not have anyone near it. So that sort of got us into it, and we were actively thinking about it even when we didn't have any contract. We were designing ways of doing things differently and getting ready for the next contract. And as I say, the next one just landed again. It was just a cold call from Australia. So it wasn't one that we were bidding on. It was just somebody had seen that we had this method of doing it remotely, and they needed it. Hazelwood is different because this is where we're able to actually control everything and design it all from scratch, and we have absolute control. So we don't need to use demolition remote methods of it. But at Hazelwood, for the chimneys, for example, we still had a remote control skid steer. One of the operators that we'd been using before at the last job, he was on hand. We had charges, reserve charges ready to actually just remotely drive up, place the charges, and bring a chimney down if it had failed to come down. So we had lots of reserves. We thought about every sort of detail of what we could do or what might go wrong, even though we had absolute confidence it wouldn't. It's a foolish man who doesn't actually plan for the worst and hope for the best. So we were ready with the remote control skid steer, which is a very powerful machine, very, very capable. It doesn't have the dexterity of our EOD robots, and we did wonder whether to send one of them over. We've got them in reserve and maintained, but we decided it wasn't worth it because the likelihood of needing them was just not great enough. But the skid steer still gave us that remote capability.
I think one of the things that strikes me, I've spent quite a few years now talking about the fact that there are no young upstarts or younger people coming into the explosive demolition business, with the possible exception of William Sinclair up at SafeDem. Everybody seems to be edging towards the retirement age, and here you guys are. I'm not going to ask you to give you your age, but you're clearly on the young side of the industry, and you're bringing new technology in. Are you the face of the future of explosive demolition?
I'd like to think so. I wouldn't say so myself, but if you want to say it, I won't disagree.
Fantastic. Listen, Roland, it's been a joy having you here. Congratulations on another job well done. Keep us informed when you're doing any more. Hopefully, you'll actually be able to be there in person to see the next one.
I hope so. Fingers crossed.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us today, and all the very best.
Right. Stay safe.
Right now, getting back to the show itself. As you know, I'm wearing this T-shirt, and I'm going to show you again because I really quite like it. I'm wearing this because of a random act of kindness from the team over at Rapallo. And before I sign off today, I'd just like to draw your attention to another example of just a simple kindness that, to my mind, is a credit to this industry and probably to even more so to Armac Group in particular. Armac Group, one of the UK's most respected demolition companies, is currently involved in the demolition of a primary school up in Rugby. And one of the Armac crew there, a guy called Lance Hawkins, was talking to a man that lives close by. It turns out that the man has lived in the same house for many years. In fact, he saw the school being built as a child and was actually one of the first intake when the school opened. His children then attended the school too, and subsequently his granddaughter was among the last intake at the school before it was due to be demolished. And without telling anyone, Lance decided this man's connection with the school was worthy of commemoration. And you can read about precisely how he did that on demolitionnews.com. Just look for a story called Breaking Bread. There's a bit of a clue in the title, but it doesn't tell the whole story. So go and check that out. But according to Armac Group's Adrian McLean, Lance had previously listened to our episode of the Demolition Daily Livestream on Monday last week, in which I spoke to Danny Kearney at ProSafe Consultants about the importance of kindness. Now, I've got no idea if that show was in any way connected to what Lance did next. And even if it is, any credit for that inspiration lies entirely with Danny Kearney. But either way, Lance, if you get to hear this, you really are a credit to the industry. I've said this so many times on this show. I would take my hat off and salute you, but I can't because I've got headphones holding it on. But you are a credit to the industry, and well done. I think that's probably enough excitement for the day. And besides, my eyes feel a little weird. So I think I'm going to go and strap a small child into the back of my car and then drive to a local beauty spot just to make sure that I'm safe to drive. Until tomorrow, stay safe, stay positive, look after yourself, look after your family, your friends and your colleagues. And in a world in which you can be anything, be like Lance. Let me do that again. In a world in which you can be anything, be like Lance Hawkins. Be kind. Until tomorrow, and in keeping with my T-shirt, arrivederci.